When we were asked in an aeroplane, is it not your experience that you are entirely in the hands of the pilot? You depend on his expertise to get you to your destination. He can't afford to make a mistake. Well, it's actually the same with the doctor and with the priest. We can't afford to make a mistake, for to get to the wrong place forever is serious, and it can happen. Wrong advice, not bothering to get in time, incomplete preaching over a long period, bad example even, an invitation to collude. Now, if you go to the catacombs in Rome, you will see how the early Christians understood the same mystery. One of the earliest representations we have of the Good Shepherd is that famous one where an early Christian fresco shows the little sheep being carried on the shoulders of the shepherd, in the context precisely of death, safely home. And that same mystery hangs quietly over the air each time you see a coffin. Which way is this eternity going? This way or that way? For it must go, and on it will go, in one direction, irreversibly. In that direction, somebody somewhere could have helped to push, well or badly. And that person could be you. Do you know that a cup of coffee can contain all eternity? You can talk, if you're a man, about the football, if you're a woman, about the hairstyle. And if you're a human being, you can talk now and again about the soul. This is not just Christian matter, it's human matter, which has bothered every human being since Adam on. Behind where I live, not far, is New Grange, where they tried to have an insurance policy against the dark, capturing the most powerful thing they knew, the sun. And it's always been there. Now, until recently, people were inclined to dismiss faith as being childish compared with science. Do you know that actually science has had to backtrack somewhat in recent times? Why? It's becoming more aware that the more one looks in detail, either into the macrocosm or into the microcosm, there's more there than science can explain. In fairly recent times, there was a good documentary done by the BBC on a case that happened in, was it New Zealand or Australia? I think it was New Zealand. It was the case of Pat Reynolds, or Pam Reynolds, doesn't matter, it's there. And she was a case who had no hope medically, because there was an aneurysm in a part of her brain that was just too delicate and dangerous to be touched. All the odds were against her. But But there was one young, brave, daring surgeon who said, "I'll try." And it meant putting her to clinical death, so the brain would have no reaction. And so, all the blood had to be drained from the brain, and by careful monitoring, they had to be sure that there was no brain activity at all before they could start to pierce the brain with the tiny drills that they had. So, everything stopped. She was clinically dead, and the drill went in. I make a jump because there's no point in going into medical details, except one. That because they had to get all the blood out, they had to get a vein that would have a certain quantity of blood in it, and they couldn't get it. They were in trouble. And one in the team in the operating theatre said, "Try the leg." And they did, and the blood was got. Bear that in mind, I'll come back to that in a second. They operated, and eventually she came out of the huge, not just anesthetic, but clinical death, and started to talk. The brain, therefore, was not hearing things, it wasn't functioning at all. She was over the table where it was all taking place, looking at all this, and she was able to report back on the detail, for instance, of having to find this vein in the leg. She noticed the exact shape and sound of the drill, and on then she went out of the immediate geography into a different realm, and there she saw quite a few things. But she came back, and this was the puzzle for the BBC, talking to the experts in question. The neutral scientist who had done the operation explained this poses a problem, because at that point it indicates that presumptuously the science up till then had said that the soul is just the operation of the brain and depends on it for its activity. From this point onwards, science has a new problem. We prove here that the soul does not depend on the brain once there is death. It's an entity which can hold its own perfectly well. And we have seen this with our own eyes. Do with it what you will. This is science. There is more. Do you know that science before other realms is also a little bit more humble than before? It has been found, and you can discover it yourself if you want to navigate on the Cybersphere, that certain constants are coming out of the universe. If one goes into a realm where two extremes are meeting, you will find that certain things are coming to the fore, which have nothing to do with myth or faith or religion, but scientific fact. The closest point in our geography to the realm of the unknown is where Earth turns into molten liquid. And the closest point between solid matter and that realm is at the base of the deepest oceans of this planet. And there are parts which are not that thick. We're talking roughly about a mile max between the bottom of the lowest seabeds and where it ceases to be matter. And there is a frontier where there is somehow a meeting of two worlds, where strange beings come out of nowhere and do strange things, and strange noises are heard. You don't believe me, do you? Google and you will see. This, by the way, is important to know when talking to somebody who knows everything. As Oscar Wilde said, I'm not young enough to know everything. So be prepared and look around, and with the smile of another reason, ask, like Socrates, if they know this bit. For the Delphic oracle answered when Socrates went to consult it, who is the man on earth who knows most? Socrates is the man on earth who knows most. Socrates, Socrates. And how is it Socrates? Because Socrates is the only one on earth who knows that he knows nothing. So science learns a lot more when it comes wanting to know, and when it comes wanting to convince. So we have no need to be afraid of our faith, do we? But I want to go a little bit further before I conclude. Are you sitting uncomfortably? Then I shall begin. After ordination, the prior started giving me all the retreats that he couldn't manage. That meant giving 8 days of 3 lectures a day in monasteries in France, usually. Therefore, one was doing there what one does at death. One gets ready for 8 days. For a retreat must do that, or it's not worth doing. And so I would give them this kind of truth. Having worked on these manuscripts in France, listen and place yourself at your anticipated tomb. It isn't possible for us to understand while yet on earth, says the soul in purgatory, what God requires of a soul that is expiating its faults in purgatory. So you believe, do you, that a large number of prayers, or, what is more, well recited, will put a soul almost immediately in possession of eternal bliss? Listen to your average eulogy at a funeral. Such is not the case. Who can fathom God's judgments? Who can comprehend the purity that he requires of a soul before he admits it to participation in his eternal happiness? Alas! Remember, this nun spent about 20 years there. If people only reflected on these things while yet on earth, what a life they would lead. Examine seriously how many, and listen to this, it might concern each one here, how many venial sins a negligent person, one who is little concerned for his salvation and is well glued to the earth, commits in one day. How many minutes does he give to God? Does he so much as think of him with reflection? Think hard. Contemplate 365 days of this kind in 1 year. And if a large number of years follow the same pattern, this person dies with the soul loaded with a multitude of venial sins which haven't been effaced because the thought never came to him. It goes on to talk about worse cases still. I told you before that the lowest level of purgatory, where she was for a while, is run on the same heating system as hell. And no one ever thinks about it. This, my friends, is matter for thought. A retreat doesn't do any harm. Why? It puts us once a year before the one thing only that really matters, and of which no one